Hoi hoi! It's louisity again, and for this video I'm going to talk about the greatest books or the best books that I read throughout the 2010s. Hoorah! So I know this is quite late, and I know that lately over the past couple of months the whole best books of the decade were like shown around BookTube or YouTube, you name it. So I decided to come up with a video of sharing you the best books of the 2010s or best books of the decade. So it was a hard, decision because there were years wherein, there were a lot of great books that I read, and some of the years where there were pretty good books, but not much impact on me. So it was really hard, but I have to decide for every year on what would be like the best book for that specific year. So every year in the 2010s, what I decided to do is like I'm going to be telling you for every year in the decade of 2010s what was the best book that I read. So let us begin. 2010 was the year that I started getting back into reading. If you folks have watched my video about my reading journey that I, spoke in my mother tongue, Filipino, you folks know that I was, of course, a reader before, but it was in 2010 during my second year of college that I started getting into reading more. And one of the best books, it was really hard for me to choose because this is one of the years when I read, a handful of great books, and it boiled down to this book because I loved it on its own. Even if I've watched the movie several times, I felt like the book was great on its own, and I can't even pick which one is better because, like I said, they were able to portray the story in the best way that they can. They're different and they're differently, great, or you would say uniquely great. And I'm talking about A Walk to Remember. Now, there were some scenes or the way the characters were portrayed in the film were different from the way they were portrayed in the book, and I just enjoyed like how cozy and relaxing the story is. The whole thing about it's not, it kind of was able to execute like it's not just like a religion thing, but it's more of like what you get out of it, embodying and how you express love towards others. I kind of got that vibe, reading A Walk to Remember. And I guess also because I've seen the movie, maybe it was easier for me to depict the pictures. But like I said, there were things that were like so different there, and I just remember like until now, that it was such a joyful book, and among the books that I read by Nicholas Sparks, I think this was my number one. I'm going to be linking down the video below regarding my ranking of books of Nicholas Sparks, so feel free to check that out. Hoorah! Oh, by the way, that new cover of A Walk to Remember, that brown cover, and you folks know that brown is my favorite color, so I admit I do have some bias with brown covers, but this one by A Walk to Remember, or rather this cover of A Walk to Remember is just really gorgeous. This new one, this brown one, the colors complement each other. Anyway, enough about like 2010s, let's move on to the 2011s. Well, I read a lot of books by Nicholas Sparks still in this year, but I'm going to be talking about the book written by another general fiction author that I loved and started reading, and this author is one of those authors that really helped me get back into reading, and she was one of the authors that like started, I would say like foundation authors that I call, because basically during my early years of getting back into reading, she was the one that her books were like the books that I read a lot and I enjoyed. And going back to the early 2010s for 2011, the greatest book that I read. This had a huge impact for me, and this is, whoops, No Greater Love by Danielle Steele. Now, the thing is, like, you know, I may be wrong about this, but some folks, when they hear the name Danielle Steele, they think about romance novels, love stories. Well, you know, it's quite right. You know, she writes a lot of love stories, but kind of like different forms of love. It's not just like the so-called heterosexual, romantic, you know, or almost erotic, but not really erotic, you know, kind of love, you know, couples and all that stuff, whatever you want to call it. You know, she is able to write, you know, books about family love, you know, the love of each family member towards another. And this story is really beautiful. It follows like a story of a family who survives, you know, the tragedy of Titanic. They became orphans, or, you know, and how they, you know, were able to cope up with life and all the struggles that they were facing, being, you know, just living among themselves. And it was just heart-wrenching. And I remember, you know, this was kind of like one of those books that served as a way to distress myself, because I remember I was really, you know, stressed in school, you know, kind of loaded, wanting to really do well that time. And this kind of like, this is a book that I would say, because usually I would read books for, you know, when I'm happy, but at that time, well, I wasn't really completely sad, but I felt like this was like the book that made me like say, I deserve a break, I deserve to read again. And it's just that this story is really beautiful. I definitely recommend this book if you folks want to know or read something about family love, survival, you know, withstanding resiliency, you know, despite the challenges that you may encounter in life, you know, dealing with loss. And oh gosh, it's just so beautiful. I just love this book. Actually, this book was owned by my mother, and I just decided to like get it because I just want to get into reading. And interestingly, you know, I wanted to get into general adult fiction, which is, I don't know if that is usual, but it's pretty cool for me. But this is a great book. The greatest book that I read in 2011. Hoorah! The best book that I read in 2012 is like this book, I would say, can compete. You know, there are times when I'm thinking I can interchange this with A Walk to Remember, or this could be tied with A Walk to Remember, because it was just so strong. You know, I know it sounds cliche, I keep on saying this phrase, like, it is beautiful in its own way, because it is, you know. It's a Nicholas Sparks book, wherein generally it's going to be like a contemporary romance or a contemporary love story. It is still like that, but it has, you know, some elements of suspense or thriller. Let me grab that book. I'm talking about Safe Haven by Nicholas Sparks. Now, this book is already turned into a movie. Beautiful cover, by the way. Yeah, just saying. Anyway, so the premise of the story goes around a woman named Katie. You know, she decides to move to another town, trying to escape her past with a new identity. And from there, she meets someone, and this haunting past of her suddenly was able to chase her. Now, how did that happen? Read this book to find out. I remember, you know, being a super slow reader that I am, and still, you know, juggling school. I was able to read this in like a couple of days. Like, I was able to devour this. Now, to some folks, maybe that is a little bit too slow, but for someone like me, like I said, who's a super slow reader, I just got hooked into it. You know, being able to, I guess, read about like 200 pages or like 150 pages a day, that's a lot. That means I was really hooked. And, you know, lately, well, I don't think it's really a bad thing, but like, yeah, I don't think I have had a book that, you know, made me read 100 or more pages in a day. Yeah, but it's not really a bad thing. But this one, it's like, it was just so awesome. I feel like this is an underrated Nicholas Sparks book. So, you know, if you folks want to read something that is like lovey-dovey, yet there are some suspense, thriller, you know, you folks want to get excited, I definitely recommend you folks to read this book. I have yet to watch the movie, so I don't know how different they are. Can't critique, but I just love this. It's the greatest book that I read in 2012. Now, also just to let you folks know, 2012 was the year that I read the most number of books. I read 43 books that year, which is a lot different compared to the other years that I've read. You know, usually I would, if I get to read like 20-ish books, that's like kind of a lot. Yeah. But yeah, that time I was able to read a lot of books, and it was one of the greatest years that I had in terms of reading. The next book that I read is kind of like a self-help, an autobiography, a memoir. One thing's for sure, it's nonfiction, and that is Committed by Elizabeth Gilbert. Now, folks know Elizabeth Gilbert because she wrote Eat, Pray, and Love, you know, and it's one of her popular books, but I feel like this one to me is better and had more impact because from the title itself and from this like ring and the cover that you see, you folks would possibly figure out that this book talks about relationships, you know, committed, you know, being committed to somebody. And it would, I remember like this discuss a lot of things that would make you ponder about whether you are prepared to be in a relationship, in a deeper kind of relationship, or you just would like to just connect with people and just get engaged and like help them out, just be the social being you are, versus to spending and investing a lot of time with someone. So I definitely, folks, if you would be able to find a copy of this, read this as well. You know, it's very impactful. Hurrah. So Committed was the best book that I read in 2013. It was written by Elizabeth Gilbert. Moving on to 2014, okay, a book that I read that had so much impact, so much feels for me. It was a book that I borrowed from my colleague, and that is The Winner Stands Alone by Paulo Coelho. If there are books that I would recommend to somebody that are written by Paulo Coelho, this is one of them. Like, you know, Alchemist is like a classic. Some people would recommend 11 Minutes. This one, you know, it's pretty good. And a little bit of a spoiler here, hopefully it's not too spoilery, but if you folks want to read something that doesn't end up kind of like on a happy ending, and kind of like what happens in life at times after like certain events, you know, and not ending kind of completely sweet, I definitely recommend you this book. You know, it's kind of like an interesting story, and the other character here, well, not really like a character attached person, I guess you would say it, but you know, the way the situation was, the way that, you know, the events were portrayed, of course, with the way you know, his personality is. Igor, I despise Igor in that book. And I don't like Igor, but that's what I like about the book, because you make me not like someone, you know what I mean? You know, whoever they are, Igor seems like a villain, but it's kind of like portrayed as like a main person or a main character in the story. So yeah, kind of a kudos. Okay, I definitely recommend it. It's just something that just blew me away, and I even recommended this to Benedict Kua, you know, or Benny Kua, Filipino YouTuber, hurrah! The best book that I read in 2015 is Room by Emma Donoghue. What I like about this book is, you know, how powerful the message is, and even if it's like a very small scene, for some reason it was written in a way that you can vividly visualize it, and I just love the whole, suspense of them wanting to see what's out there, and it's just an interesting way to portray a story of what it's like being kind of like sheltered, being in a place where you never, you were never able to see like what the world is out there. And this book, oh gosh, it was just so cool. It was awesome the way the scenes were portrayed, that you don't really have to. Sorry, I'm kind of like lost for words here. I know, I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job, but anyway, who cares? And going back to Room now, I know this was already depicted as a film, but there were scenes here that were pretty cute, especially when the mother and the kid were kind of like dealing with each other. It was pretty cool. Correct me if I'm wrong with that one, if it's a mother or kid or between siblings. Yeah. Anyway, it's been a while since I read it, but I know pretty sure that this is one of the books that like had an effect on me. I think that 2015 there weren't really that like whoa books for me that I read, but there were still a handful that were pretty good. Like this one, Room by Emma Donoghue. It was able to do something that's like extraordinary in kind of like an ordinary kind of like setting, because usually with like books that have kind of like being in a room, or kind of like in terms of like the setting, it's not like that wide. Sometimes you feel like claustrophobic about it, and I did feel that. And Everything by Nicola Yoon kind of has a similar take on that, and Room was able to like execute it really well. If a book is able to make me like have a vivid picture of what is going on, then you're able to portray and tell a story. That is what is important. That's your job as a novelist. The greatest book that I read in 2016 is a part of a series, and if you folks have watched one of my oldest videos, if you folks have been a subscriber since 2018, this is one of the series that I truly love. I'm talking about the Fallen series by Lauren Kate. Now, my favorite in the series would have to be Passion. Okay, the cool thing about Passion is that the story kind of goes wherein our main characters, Daniel and of course Lucinda. Now, I hope I don't come off as spoilery, but that's kind of like the main thing. If you folks would read like the synopsis of the first books, or even if you start reading it, you know that like Daniel and Luciana will have something going on. Now, the thing about this book, it talks about like how they've kind of been reincarnated, and how they've lived their previous lives in different time zones, and how they knew each other, and how they loved each other, and what were the consequences of their relationship. And what I love most about this book is like the time travel aspect, because they kind of like go back in time and discover their relationship. So I definitely recommend the series, and this has to be like if you're into like time traveling, I definitely recommend for you to read this book, Passion by Lauren Kate. Well, you can read the first two, definitely, and then this is gonna be the next. And I read Rapture. It was okay. It was kind of like bland in the first, like one of those times where you would read like 100+ pages of a book, and then you felt like it's not really going anywhere. That is what it came off, and for this book, it did not come off like that. So it's pretty good. Of course, at some point, there is a book that is written by a Filipino that is gonna make it into this list. In 2017, I read some books written by Filipino authors, and I would have to say that this one is like the greatest one that I read in 2017. And if you folks have watched some of my videos before, some of those book tags, I don't recall which tag it was. It has a question wherein you have to name a book that should be a classic, and this is a Filipino classic in my list. Smaller and Smaller Circles by F.H. Batacan. It talks about, issues on like, justice, being able to claim the justice that people deserve. Also some, social classes based on financial, standing, disparity. Yeah, disparity is kind of like there's a divide, or there are times when you would say, oh, it's just that the situation is just really unfair, because if you folks would understand the process and like getting somebody as a security person for, let's say, for the position that you actually apply for, the department that you are applying for, let's say for a curator, it's kind of like you would be weirded out, like you weren't included in the conversation. But anyway, going back to this book, I just loved like the little blurbs that were going on, trying to understand what was going on in the criminal's mind. And this is already turned into a movie. I haven't watched it yet. I'm not really much of a movie person. So yeah, and this is one of those books wherein I don't think it was really that bloody, but it's one of those books that you would be intrigued on who did what, because with some thrillers that are quote marketed as thrillers, they don't give you that vibe where you're curious about who did what. It's like most of them are just kind of like coasting the story. So, well, yeah. Another book from the series is a book that made in this list. Now, the best book that I read in 2018. Ta-da! Lost Hero by Rick Riordan. Now, this book has some attached memories to it. I remember like when my aunt visited us here in the Philippines. She came from Australia, and this is a book that I was reading, and this is one of the books that I said like, oh gosh, I really love, and I gush and I rave about it. I gave 5 out of 5 stars. It didn't kind of like show me its flaws, and at the same time, like the traveling aspect, moving on to different places. Interestingly, I haven't been really into traveling around the Philippines, like physically, but I like reading about traveling, it's kind of weird. Well, I'm weird anyway, so yeah, this book is like the first book in the Heroes of the Olympus series. Now, if you folks read Percy Jackson and the Olympians, now this series is the next one that you can kind of like jump in and like know more about. It's just really cool, and it just has a lovely setting. It was written and synthesized in a way that it would have great stories and people would stay. Now, the greatest book of 2019 happens to be a book that I read like towards the last month of 2019. So that just means that whatever time that I read you, but if you had such a great impact on my reading experience, then we're good. And I don't think it's because I read it during December. I think it's more like just the story itself is really hard hitting. It's an extremely super much hard hitting contemporary. There was some cutesy romance here, lovey-dovey, but it kind of like goes back to the ordeals or the situations that they're dealing with, that our characters are dealing with. Not much of a character attached person, but I'm kind of like more leaning towards their situation. But I am hoping that can grow and be great. So I'm talking about the book All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. I already filmed a book review on this one, so I'll link it down below. Now, overall, this book, like I said, it's the book that is like #feels. Hoorah! So those are the books that I read in the 2010s that were the greatest. I told you folks what would be the greatest book that I read for every year, the 2010s, 20,000s. What's that? Anyway, I was super excited. Going back, so yeah, every year I told you the greatest book that I read during the 2010s. And yes, it was quite difficult for me to kind of like assess which is which, because I already told it during the first part that, you know, there were years that had a lot of great reads. So feel free to comment down below, you know, like what was the greatest book that you read during the 2010s, or if you have any kind of like video about the 2010s reads that you had from 2010 to 2019, what were the greatest books that you read during those years. You know, feel free to comment down below. So yeah, and this was a pretty hard list, but yeah, gotta go through it. So I guess, you know, that's about it. If you folks like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Also click that subscribe button and hit that little bell icon somewhere down there to keep yourselves posted about my videos. Also I'll be putting down my links and social media handles, so feel free to check me out and follow me there as well. As always, thank you super much for watching. Let's continue seeking for wisdom and unleash the reader in you. Bye y'all.